Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney. Ooh, oops. I told it not to forward my audio, so now I had to hear it in the real world. Hello, everyone, and thanks for giving us your time today for VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney in London as we discuss the next steps in personal computing. We're wearing Quest 3 headsets with last generation meta avatars, and I want to say thank you to our UploadVR patrons for helping us expand our coverage. That's XR Developer News, Podum, the developer of Smash Drums out there, HoloNet, Mike Manzano, Richard Meller, and Aaron Bellamy. David, what do we have today?
Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to be at a live show with you today. We're going to first talk about some Apple Vision Pro news. We'll talk about the dbrand's Trypophobic Apple Vision Pro faceplate and battery holder. We will talk about TouchDesk, an application that turns your desk into a finger painting surface. And then we will talk about the NBA app update. The official NBA app now has a 3D tabletop view, and that looks really incredible. We will then talk a little bit about PlayStation VR 2. The first PlayStation VR 2 game to support hand tracking is out. It's Waltz of the Wizard. It's a free update to that app, and it lets you use controller-free hand tracking on PlayStation VR 2 for the first time. We'll then briefly talk about the Super Bowl, specifically the fact that Meta ran 2 ads during it to advertise their Ray-Ban Meta smart glasses. So it shows you the level of ambition for scaling that business they have and how much they're willing to put in to advertising it at the moment. We will then have a brief discussion of Android XR, specifically the fact that it has now been confirmed by Google that apps can access the Passthrough camera view, which opens up a lot of possibilities. It's something that's coming to Quest soon as well, and that Apple Vision Pro currently only allows for enterprise. We will then discuss some military use cases of XR. Palmer Luckey's Anduril is taking over the US Army IVAS program, replacing Microsoft's custom HoloLens solution. So that is a massive, massive shift. Potentially, that contract is worth up to $22 billion over 10 years. Finally, we will discuss John Carmack's controversial comments on PC VR, where he called it a boutique niche and said that Beat Saber was far more important than Half-Life Alyx. So we'll have a little PC VR versus standalone VR.
Yeah, we'll have a nice little fight then, right?
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, so hello, Arlen. Hello, Earth Witness. Hello to Inferno, Onakazi. Let's see, VR Gamer Dude out there. Davin Bigelow, KC Chiefs Productions. I see it's also stormy in Austria right now. We love seeing where everyone is watching us from. We had our show last week where we broke the news live that SideQuest had layoffs. We've been ongoing with our coverage of that, as well as just this ongoing transition in the market from Meta Quest focused releases to something new. Right, we're still in this transitional phase into something new happening in the VR market, and a bunch of our headlines today are describing some of those changes that are happening on the larger market. So let's just get right into this first Apple Vision Pro section, I think, because people are going to want us to give time to those last few subjects. So 6, 7, and 8 on our lineup today are the Android XR, Palmer Luckey's Anduril, and John Carmack, and each of those are large subjects that go and touch different things. So we definitely want to discuss that.
Sure. So this first discussion isn't going to be much of a discussion at all. It's just interesting to note that dbrand, the very popular case maker, has come out with a Trypophobic, that's a difficult word to say, Apple Vision Pro faceplate. And that word refers to a fear of like an assortment of small holes. You may be aware of the idea of some people have that kind of fear or discomfort by seeing something like this. So if you are one of those people, don't look at the stream right now, maybe just listen on audio. But this idea actually came from a designer, Kyle Goodrich, who posted it on X after 3D printing it a few weeks after Vision Pro launched, and dbrand liked it so much that they reached out to him to turn this into a real product. This is a limited edition product. It is called Aperture. It is $49 for just the faceplate, or $69 to also get this battery holster as well with the same design. It comes in either black or orange, depending on your preference. And yeah, if you're kind of into this visual design, you may find this cool, because to make a case for, or whatever you want to call this, for a headset requires not blocking the sensors. You can't just do a traditional phone case that puts a pattern over it. So there's two approaches to this, right? One is to have the entire thing transparent, except cut out some holes for the sensors. The other approach is to embrace the holes. You put the entire thing in holes like this, and then this is what you get. So they claim that, this has zero blockage of the sensors. It's not going to affect anything except for eyesight, of course. This will block the rendered view of your eyes in the front of the headset. But I think that's a trade-off that people are probably fine to make.
So if you're just tuning into VR Download, we're explaining how some cases on the Apple Vision Pro need to embrace the holes, as David put it. I appreciate that language. I remember, if anyone's ever seen Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, the outfits that they wear in the future version of San Dimas is what I picture this thing to look like. So for any of our other audio listeners out there that can't see this thing on the outside of the case, that's what it looks like, is those weird spandexy outfits that they wear in the future that are all stretched out and weird in San Dimas in the future. Anything else to discuss here? We move right along.
No, I think we can move along. I think the only thing I want to note is that this is a limited edition run. So they say that whenever the stock of this thing runs out, they won't be making any more. So if you are a Vision Pro owner and you want this for some reason, some people say they really like this design. I don't think I'll be putting it anywhere near the Vision Pro I'm using. So if you want it, you got to grab it now.
Yeah, so this next one is a fun one that David pointed me to, and it took me a while to jump into. Well, not as soon as I did. It took me a while because this requires some calibration on Apple Vision Pro. The app is called TouchDesk, and it turns your desk into a finger painting surface. So I basically tried to launch this a couple days in a row, and it's like you need to have a clean desk, you need to have a clean background, and so it took me a couple of days to get this up and running. When I finally did with my little portable desk here, it kind of blew my mind. All right, so I reached out to Easy Breezy, the developer of this app, who is based in China, and they said that they were a former developer at ByteDance, which was really fascinating to get over their messages. And they said they wanted to build an app that embraced the way they used the Apple Vision Pro. And 100% that's what this app does. It's really, really, really cool. So it uses multitasking, and you position it right over your desk and line up the surface of your desk right in line with the surface of the app. And then, boom, you just have a touch surface right in front of you. You can run your finger like it's finger paint right onto the desk. And so there's this video I put, we've got Don Hopper out there in the comments, this VR Gamer dude, where I'm just trying to test this out in my office, and I write "Hi Don" here on my desk, just with the finger paint, and then I cover it with my hands, and it gets perfectly blocked by my hands. I put my hands right up to the little finger paint that I've just drawn on the desk, and it's completely blocked out. It looks perfect, and it's a powerful little enhancement to just feel that your content is actually there permanently on the table, even when you block it with your hands. It's really, really cool effect.
I think, as you say, one thing that makes this app really stand out is that it is a shared space app. So if you're not familiar with Vision OS, the operating system of Apple Vision Pro, apps that live in the shared space mean that if they're 3D or 2D, they live alongside other apps. It's a true multitasking experience, unlike anything you get on any other XR operating system that's out there for consumers today. And so that means that not only can Ian, while he's using this, have open Disney Plus or something like that, he can also have three-dimensional apps as long as they support the shared space alongside this. So this can just be part of his wider spatial workspace. Now, the one problem with that is that what you cannot do as a shared space app is pinned to a surface, right? So as you noted, you have to manually align this with your desk, and that is the flaw here. What we would love to see in Vision OS 3, which we expect to be shown off in June, we'd love to see the ability for shared space, volumetric apps and windows to be pinned to surfaces. So I want to be able to pin Disney Plus to my wall or pin TouchDesk to my desk.
And so David pointed out, I've got two videos in my article. The first one I just described there, of writing out "Hi Don" there. But the one that really impressed me more, even though David was right that it impresses people at home more, what I just described, writing on your physical desk. But the thing that I was talking with the dev about and the multitasking capability is you can go into full VR, right? You're on the moon, you're on the beach of some sandy beach somewhere and just relaxing. And you've got your ultra wide screen up here, just your Mac is just huge right here. And then you've got your phone over here streaming over AirPlay. And then right here in the middle, right on your desk, you have your desk physically in front of you, and you can write on it over the sands of the beach. It's brought your desk into VR with you a little bit, and you can write on it while you're in VR. You can't see your desk, which makes it a pain in the butt to use.
So why wouldn't you just twist the dial so that you can see your desk and still be in the virtual environment?
Fantastic question. So I had some bugginess with that in the app. So in some modes, it seemed it didn't want to let me have access to the environmental tab. Like I couldn't seem to turn the dial in some instances. Like it was just hard.
So it does maybe become a full space app. I haven't actually had the chance to try this out myself. My desk isn't really large enough to make this worthwhile, the joys of living in a small UK apartment. But if I did have a large desk, I'd love to use it.
Well, so I've got a portable desk. It's an itty bitty little portable desk, and this is the kind of thing I was leading to. Is the portable desk is really, really neat because I can roll it around wherever I need to. If I want to rotate my office 90 degrees, I can. My keyboard goes 90 degrees. My screens all go wherever I want them to. It's really, really convenient. But when you get the touch surface desk thing, what ends up being interesting is like, oh, I actually don't want any of this on my desk right now. I'm going to take all the virtual content, the app that's floating right here over my desk, and just place it over there to the side. Just get it out of the way for a little while. And then like, oh yeah, I actually want to work on my desk again. Let's pull that back over. Let's line it back up, and boom, I'm back to making notes on my desk again. It's a really, really interesting idea for extensibility.
It is that line it up again part that really kills me, though. I know that that's where we are today. You know, theoretically, this device probably, if Apple really wanted to, could track a portable desk and bring this all along, but this is still stuff that we need to see in future versions of Vision OS. We're only on Vision OS 2. Think of where iOS is today on iOS 18, and we're going to see a lot of this stuff, dynamic and static object tracking that's actually usable by apps in the shared space. It has to come as future Vision OS versions. What this really makes me want, though, is, of course, Apple Pencil support. It was something that was, strongly rumored back at last year's Vision OS 2 reveal and didn't happen. Perhaps it is on the cards for Vision OS 3. Imagine being able to do this with your Apple Pencil. And on the MetaQuest ecosystem, you do have that Logitech MX Ink, but I don't think we've really seen many apps built around the 2D uses of it yet. It seems to mainly be for 3D, though developers haven't had that for long. In general, it's a very promising avenue here, the ability to kind of have spatial art on demand with either your fingers in this case, or ideally with a stylus.
Yeah, and just it's such a delight to see the multitasking. That is a rare thing on the Apple ecosystem. You can go try out an app like Figment XR, which overtakes your entire Apple Vision Pro. It takes over your entire Quest to any headset you put it on. Or the other end of the spectrum, this new class of app that it's really hard to develop for. Like you've got to rethink a lot of paradigms about how your app works in order to get up and running for the multitasking shared space apps. But it makes a difference to have all of your other things floating around you. So can't wait to see what gets developed further with this idea and if other ideas sort of get folded into it. Hello to Not Suspicious in our audience. I like LL watching UploadVR from the bath. So good for you, LL. Hope you're relaxing out there.
So yeah, we have a comment here. We are going to move on to our third Apple Vision Pro story soon to answer Anakazi's question, who said they were on cloud nine when I went over the schedule. Yes, we are going to talk about the NBA app next. But firstly, I want to just address a comment from TMS saying, Apple is done with this stuff. No point in pretending they are still interested. So this is a very common misconception and something that people really tend to think, but it's really not what we're seeing in the evidence, right? As we pointed out, either last week or the week before, I'm not sure which episode it was. Not only are Apple not done with Vision Pro, but in their new store design, which means the layout of their newest stores, we've seen it in Milton Keynes in the UK and in Miami in the US. They actually have a dedicated side room for Vision Pro demos and Vision Pro sales. And every time I bring this up, someone asks, is this really just for Vision Pro or is it for other products? According to the people I've spoken to, 5 different people who have been to these stores now. They say it's just Vision Pro. They went in, they saw only Vision Pros. They asked the staff, is this for Vision Pro? The staff said, yes, this is a Vision Pro section. So it's very counter to the narrative that you'll see in the mainstream tech media. But if you look at the reality here, we expect to see Vision OS 3 shown off at WWDC in June with a range of improvements. We don't know what those are. We'll certainly, put out an article, I'm sure, saying all the things we want to see in Vision OS 3, and then we'll be testing it out as soon as it comes along. So are we ready to talk about that third Vision Pro story then?
Yeah, let's move right along to it. I guess I'll give the context before you give that of what NextVR is in comparison to this.
I was going to kind of
the comparison. Yeah, go ahead if you want to do that.
Yeah, I'll run down that. So the official NBA app for Apple Vision Pro now has a tabletop feature that shows you a virtual 3D rendered, this is real-time rendering version of the live match you're watching in front of you. And this is using the motion capture technology that is already built in to these stadiums. I'm not a basketball fan myself, but my understanding is they use it for like refereeing as well as like analysis of players. So they're using that same tech to bring you this diorama scale live with a half a second delay, which is remarkable given what this is, view of the game in front of you. And so this is not a replacement for the regular stream. This is in addition to. So in front of you on a large virtual screen, you see the regular television 2D live stream. And then in front and below you, you see this 3D rendered view. And this is remarkable, right? Because this is the kind of stuff we used to see years ago as like a CG concept render of the future of XR. This is what it'll look like one day. And you would think, wow, I'm sure one day that'll actually come along and exist. And then now here we are in the year 2025. It exists. It's the official NBA app. But as Ian is alluding to there are, of course, two kind of views of how you might watch sports like this, right? One of them is this idea where, you're in AR, pass-through, whatever you want to call it. You're still mostly aware of your real environment. You have this giant review of the regular TV live stream, and then you have some additions, like you could have statistics on the side, like you see up here, as well as a 3D tabletop view in front of you. The other view, of course, is the idea of just bringing you into the stadium. So that's what you get today on Quest with the X Stadium app that's supported by Meta. It's a 180-degree live stream of 52 NBA games per season, but it is 2D. So it is 180 degrees, but it's 2D. What we've seen Apple do with their Apple Immersive Video technology, which they which they built out of their acquisition of a startup called NextVR, which existed years ago, is pre-recording of highlights in 3D 180 in a lot higher quality. So there are these differing views of how you might view the future of sports. Would you prefer to be at the courtside viewing it using 180-degree cameras, or would you prefer to be in your room seeing it on an enormous screen bigger than your TV and a tabletop view, giving a 3D sort of overview? The one thing I want to note just before we go into discussion here is that there's another app that did this for Formula One called Laps, and it was incredible. It was one of the best Vision OS apps there was, and it took the same exact concept of a tabletop view, except instead of players, it's cars, and you can see every single car's exact position, and by pointing and pinching, you could see even a view from the helmet camera of each driver. This Laps was taken down by the F1, so it's no longer available. But the NBA, on the other hand, have obviously taken a very different view of this technology. They've not only embraced it, but they've released it in their official NBA app.
So wonderful overview there by David. NextVR, if you haven't been familiar with them, so David showed the X Stadium before. NextVR takes that to the next level. So that is stereoscopic, ultra high resolution, 180-degree footage of live NBA games done at NextVR years ago. They had an entire streaming schedule worked out. We had the whole schedule on UploadVR, dozens of games a year, a bunch of live games that you could go and see with your NBA. I believe it was tied to your NBA Pass subscription over the life of that. So you'd get in your headset, you'd have to log into like NextVR, and then in NextVR you'd have to log into your NBA subscription, and like you'd have to log into multiple things on your headset in order to get access to this media this way. Someone pointed out there, I didn't realize this, that the first, I think, Super Bowl video that hit the Apple Vision Pro that was pretty impressive expired. It's not on there. You can't go to the Super Bowl. The first Super Bowl I don't know if you've looked there, David, but if someone out there is an Apple Vision Pro owner, go see if you can find the first Super Bowl in the Apple immersive video section. The point being there is that the rights issues for every sporting event are, each individual one is $1 billion market in and of itself. And so we are seeing chess play out right in front of us when it comes to the broadcast of live sports in VR. I think there were some moves over at Meta involving UFC. You can imagine going to a UFC fight and actually being on in the event in the hexagon or whatever, right?
Stadium has that same app, but it's 2D 180 degree. But yeah, Stadium has NBA and UFC.
So there's a big difference there between monoscopic 180 degree video and the stuff that NextVR was doing years ago. So NextVR got bought by Apple, and they're already integrating this technology. This is my super long-winded way of saying Apple has a headset that they can go and take to the executives of every sports team in the world. And every one of those billionaires, they put it on their head and say, okay, you know what? This volumetric app, you can sell the data for your volumetric app. You can attach your subscription to the volumetric app. This volumetric floating thing can be all yours. We don't touch it. We don't make revenue on it. In this case, it's tied to the NBA subscription, League Pass, right?
Correct. Yes. You need the League Pass for this.
So imagine whatever sport it is, Apple could come to you and say, that's yours. Let us put our cameras on the sides of every place in your stadium. And we're going to stream 180 degrees 3D video to all of our Apple Vision Pro owners at a very, very low price. Let's say it's 99 cents. Let's say it's free. Let's say it's some kind of just promotion event for Apple Vision Pro users. So let's say you're an Apple Vision owner, you put on your headset, and this weekend, the F1 race in Europe is being broadcast in headset. You put it on, and you are at the side of the race course, and you're pressing a button or being automatically shifted to every single camera angle around the course. You feel like you're actually on that racetrack with the racers this way. And then if you actually pay a significant amount of money to this league that you love watching, you could pull up a volumetric app right in front of you and watch the map play out in front of you and see where everyone is on the course. That's a model I just wanted to paint as a possible future for Apple and something that Meta may want to try to match.
Yeah, I guess you make a good point against my question to the audience of which they would prefer, of why not both, right? Why not be, it wouldn't really make sense for basketball because of the scale, but in something like F1, for example, or football, why not be in the audience and have a volumetric version in front of you so that you get full situational awareness? I think it's very clear that whichever of these companies can get to what you're describing, 180-degree immersive 3D, high bitrate, high resolution, spatial audio versions of these matches is going to be able to sell a lot of headsets, right? It's something that once Apple gets it, it'll be downloaded in stores. You'll notice I'm saying once because it seems so obvious that they're going to get to this, right? It has to be. You go and you watch the highlight videos that they've put out on Apple Immersive Video for these sports, and you just sit there and think, why, like, I need this live, right? You think this is great. Okay. It's great to see a highlight reel as a demo, because that's all it really is when you're watching a month-old game in highlights, a demo. But if you could get this live, that sells headsets. And with Xstadium, we have to point out that app has a great feature where you can do this with friends over the internet, right? They will appear as their meta avatar beside you. You could imagine on Apple them adding the ability to do this with spatial personas. So you're sitting there courtside with your friend and it's a spatial persona. We have some people in the comments talking about, do we need a cheaper Apple headset? Is $3,500 too much of an entry fee? Of course it is. But as we say in this show often, as the headsets get cheaper and lighter over time, each iteration getting slightly cheaper, slightly lighter, at some point you are going to get a mass market for this that says, I am willing to pay this. Because, for example, the adoption of large flat screen TVs at home was massively accelerated by sports. If you look, I'm this is one of my interests of looking at the history of technology adoption. I say this often on the show. If you look back there, people did consumer surveys about why did you just go from this 24-inch CRT to this 50-inch plasma or whatever. And if you look at the first kind of surge of adoption, it was sports. The majority reason was, I want to watch my sports on a big TV without having to go to the sports bar.
People noticing that their news people have freckles on them. They want to know why their screen suddenly has dots on it that they didn't notice before. Yeah, and then the sports games is the other example of like I just upgraded my TV. Why are things so weird? I love that. That's a really, really, really good point. And so I think we've got the future of gaming here. I love the of watching professional sports here. The comment here from someone suggesting that disposable income is on the decline. We covered that trend in our recent write-up on the VR development market. Just don't underestimate the idea that some people want to spend their money on this, and when you start adding the two things together that I just described, 180 degree, everything David just outlined again, the volumetric video plus the 3D high bit rate, 180 degree. When you put those things together, you're not leaving the home and you're going to your favorite basketball game. You're going to your favorite sporting event. You could have courtside seats, rinkside seats, course side seats, right? Like the best seat in the house at your favorite sporting event.
And with your friends.
With your friends. You can have all of that. And if Apple plays all of its cards right, like it can extend to other platforms in various ways. Like if they really want to like share, you could maybe do a FaceTime call to a flat screen if they pull the DRM off. But like this is the core of the idea that they need to pull off in every single sporting event. And I'm very excited to see it. So you bring the headset down in price, and suddenly, like, you're not buying that 70-inch television to watch your favorite league game.
Yeah, and while the point about disposable income is very much so valid, the people who do have a lot of disposable income and like to spend it on things like this tend to be Apple customers, right? Apple has carved out a place in the market as one of the only companies in the world, only tech companies in the world for which people are willing to pay very high prices and enable very high profit margins for the hardware itself. Most of the tech industry for a long time now has been focusing on lower hardware margins and then making money back with services. And Apple is doing services too, but it's one of the only companies that can still, to a mass market of people, have things like 50%, 60% margins. So the thought you had there, by the way, about cross-platform is fascinating, because what we saw happen yesterday in the flat screen world is Apple TV coming to Android phones. And that's something that Apple has been doing with its services for a while. You can get Apple Music on Android. So it does beg the interesting question, could we see Apple immersive video, including Apple live immersive video that we're speculating may exist at some point in the near future, come to Quest headsets and Android XR too? That's a very interesting question. And maybe it's not right, the time's right for it, but if they are putting all of this investment in, and it is eventually backed by your Apple TV subscription, and they are focusing on services as their growth engine right now, maybe we do see it, as crazy as it sounds, Maybe not Meta headsets, because Apple does have a huge animosity against Meta. That is very well known, very widely reported. But I could see it on Android XR, for example.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful review there. A lot of stuff that we're going to follow up on and think about. I think having 5 friends in the living room watching the game on a 100-inch TV will beat 5 people wearing Vision Pros. It is also much cheaper and more sociable. But 5 Vision Pros in different places.
Yeah.
Those friends all need to be in your city to come over for that game.
Yeah, this is the thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. This is the thing we often say about VR, which is like you compare it against this hypothetical idea of being able to be in person with your friends all the time. That's not the world we live in today. Ask yourself, what percentage of your socialization with friends is on WhatsApp, is on Discord, is on other remote technologies, because you either physically can't be in person. You're thousands of miles away, you're hundreds of miles away, you're dozens of miles away after a long day where you've already spent driving back and forth to work. Think of all of that time that you spend hanging out remotely with people today. That's the time that VR can enhance. It's not that we're saying it's going to replace the in person. If you can be in person with people, of course, none of this technology matters. Maybe you could say that once we get to AR glasses, you could all be in the room wearing AR glasses, and that might be that might be a thing. We can talk about that separately. But even if you completely ignore that, think of the percentage of your time today that is spent hanging out remotely. I would say most modern friendships in the year 2025, you actually spend in aggregate more time texting, calling, playing video games remotely than you do actually being in person.
Preach. Yeah, that's very, very true. And the thing that like I've gone on essays about this on other shows, but I got my Blu-ray discs into my headset. I can pull up a Blu-ray disc on my Mac virtual display right now, and have it in the Quest 3 and watch it while, in the background, just like this is the real world. But the hoops I had to jump through to make that possible, to make sure that the levels of protection that the movie companies put on those discs, on their streams, on their entire revenue stream, in order to make sure they get paid money for every single set of eyeballs that sets eyes on that Blu-ray disc. I've had to I've had to jump through so many ridiculous hoops to make this possible. But what we're saying is that's a software problem, folks. And the software is being solved by the biggest companies in the world. And so, like David's thing he suggested earlier, like I'm imagining, what if the free streams, what if you could log in on the headset any night of the week and watch 5 different live sports courtside, but they're all 2D. It's all free, but it's all 2D. And you feel like you're there, but it's not quite 3D, but it's free. What if the price was that, and what if it was that easy to go to a basketball game, an NFL game? What if you could just put on a headset and you're there at your Friday night high school high school football game? That's absurd to imagine, because we don't have the sensing technology out on the field of the high school football game to make that possible. But we do have it in the NBA courts that are providing exactly what we just showed on that stream.
Yeah, a lot to think about there, about the future of sports, the future of how we watch things, the future of how we hang out remotely. And again, just want to underscore remotely, because we already spend so much time together, so much time apart hanging out remotely.
No drunk driving with remote hangouts. I'm just going to bring it up because people are doing their bar crawls in VR chat from world to world. And if you think about the next thing that people go and do, right, go hang out the sports bar, like that's a third place for adults that can be captured by VR in the same way like the playground has. All right, we need to move on to the Waltz of the Wizard story, right, David?
Yeah, let's move on to that. So this isn't something we need to talk about too much, but we do want to note it as a significant moment. We talked before on this show, I think a month or two ago, about how Sony didn't announce but did show at SIGGRAPH, a computer graphics conference, that PlayStation VR 2 now supports hand tracking. Now we have the first game to actually do it. So this announcement back then, we talked about it at the time, was just that it was available in the SDK for a developer to use, but no developer had yet used it until now. Waltz of the Wizard, an excellent game in itself, available on other platforms as well. One of the pioneers of hand tracking on Quest when it arrived there. Well, it's now got hand tracking on PlayStation VR 2. The remarkable thing about this, and again, I gotta wonder what's going on at Sony sometimes. Sony has still not actually made an official announcement about PlayStation VR 2 getting hand tracking. Let's just say that again for people who don't realize. We have the first controller-free hand tracking game on PSVR 2. You can go now on your PlayStation 5, buy it, download it, play it, and Sony has not announced that this headset has controller-free hand tracking. This image comes from the side of a booth at a trade show. So really bizarre from Sony there, but we now live in a world where if their game already supports hand tracking on other platforms, it'll be a lot easier. Or they could bring hand tracking centered games, right? We might see Maestro, for example, come over to PlayStation VR 2 now and other such content. So I know I keep saying it, but this is so weird. Why not announce this?
I think my prediction is that there's another shoe to drop, right? That would be the reason to it. So this is part of a broader effort. David and I, going back years, how many years have we been doing this show? When did we first start doing these podcasts? I was wondering that today. Do you remember, David?
That's a good question. I think 2020, so roughly 5 years or so, roughly.
Yeah, so we've been doing this a while, and we've had this debate long going on the bingo cards of just whether Sony is going to whether Sony was going to have PC support for the PSVR 2. I won that battle. But for the wrong reasons, David says. I think that's a fair
Yes.
summary of that, right?
Yes, for the wrong reasons.
All right. But so that my point is, and I've hit this again and again over the last few years that we've been building to this, is unexpected partnerships and unexpected partnerships that come on unexpected timelines. And I think that's where we are with this. That's my guess, David. I very much want to go into an Apple store and pick up a pair of PSVR 2 controllers. I want to pick up the PSVR 2 charging dock, and I want to combine it with the Apple Vision Pro very, very, very badly. And I feel like you can clear stock of two high-priced products by combining them that way.
Yeah, as we've discussed on previous shows, including last week's show, we do expect that at some time this year, Apple Vision Pro will start supporting the PlayStation VR 2 controllers as a partnership between Apple and Sony. And that could be announced any month. We just don't know when it's going to be announced specifically. But on this issue, which seems pretty unrelated, like I doubt this is using Apple's hand tracking software or anything like that. I think Not Suspicious in the comments, the developer of Airspace Defender, has an interesting theory that perhaps Sony is waiting for more titles to implement it before they officially announce it. So that seems likely, okay? That once you get 5 games supporting controller-free hand tracking on PlayStation VR 2, then Sony comes along with an announcement and says, now you have a bunch of hand tracking games. And it's a weird way to do it, but it kind of does make sense as a games company to wait for there to be games supporting it.
So, Not Suspicious, are you going to be exploring PSVR 2 development for Airspace Defender? I would love to see your comment in the comments out there. We're also wondering if you've reached out to Apple. I heard a hint out there that Apple might be more distributive with their dev kits these days, but I'm not sure. I haven't confirmed that. So good luck to you out there, Airspace Defender devs, on getting your dev kit for that game.
Wait, do you mean Apple or Sony? You said Apple, but
so I meant Apple and the Apple Vision Pro, because I was talking. They want a dev kit for Airspace Defender for Apple Vision Pro. So I just wanted to mention that. But also, I meant to say also, Airspace Defender is a hand tracking game. I would like to see it on PS5 now, if that's formally happening. So, Not Suspicious out there responding to me in the comments saying, yeah, I think we'll need to look into PSVR 2 and also Apple Vision Pro. So good luck out there on getting that game onto multiple platforms.
Yeah, I think for developers, this just gives them another avenue if they are focused around hand tracking, especially if their game is hand tracking centric, right? Like Maestro, for example, I think we could see there. Don't think there's much else we need to say about this other than that I tried this very briefly earlier on, not enough time. I've been very busy and found that the quality of hand tracking is excellent. It's akin to I'd say it's slightly better than Quest, though it's hard to tell how much of that is just because of the higher performance of something like this compared to running on a Quest, right? It does feel really good, but again, that's just very, very initial impressions.
Onakazi saying not sure Sony would be super into showing black and white pass through outside its basic utility. I think we've all answered the question ourselves. There are no games, therefore why promote it, right? Like, so
Yeah.
there's no point in sort of pushing it until it's got content to push.
I guess that's an interesting question, though, right? Like the last thing you would need for basic feature parity between PlayStation VR 2 and the likes of Quest and Pico and Android XR is pass-through support, right? Mixed reality. Um, PlayStation VR 2's pass-through is decently high resolution on the grand scheme of things, but it is black and white. So that would open the question, like, do Sony think that black and white pass-through would be compelling enough to have mixed reality on PlayStation VR 2? I doubt it. Uh, but maybe again, this is complete speculation. If they really did want to have like a mixed reality strategy, you could perhaps see like a PlayStation VR 2S that adds two color cameras to the center and that gives you color pass through. Uh, it seems unlikely given that Sony doesn't seem to exactly be particularly focused on PlayStation VR 2. But if they wanted to, I don't think there's anything that would stop them from adding color pass through in a hardware revision.
It's interesting to think about the various handoffs that need to happen. I just talked about Blu-ray discs earlier in the show, but like getting a Blu-ray disc out of a PlayStation 5 into a Vision Pro at its peak quality would be a really nice thing to have in the handoff, if that should happen between those two companies. I want to just say with Waltz of the Wizard, Alden, the developer behind that, has been working on this project for quite some time. If you go and play this game, go try it on PSVR 2 or any other platform. Go spend a lot of time with the little skull and explore what you can do with the little skull on the table. They've put a lot of work into this game. So games like, I don't know, Job Simulator, even that this is mimicking, like this is Job Simulator with magic, but they've also just built a ton of depth into these systems that in other games you might not you might have just tuned yourself to just this game, these playground type games not having a lot of depth around them. This is the granddaddy of those games. This has a lot of depth to these systems, so play with them for a while.
Yeah, this is a really cool sort of hand physics playground, I guess you could say. And I've actually noticed that this has gone viral several times on Instagram Reels and TikTok. There are actually people, who I've speak to that are not in the tech industry, not in VR, that have sent me videos of this from these platforms of saying, what's this game? This looks really cool. It has this real potential because of just the kind of silly absurdism. What we're trying to say here is if you do have a Quest or any headset that supports this game, go try it out.
Absolutely. Try out different combinations on the little music pad right there, and even speak on some platforms. Yeah, check that out. We're ready to talk about the smart glasses Super Bowl ads, because I'm ready to talk about the fact that those ads are not Quest ads. So David, why don't you break this down for us?
Yes, that is certainly a very important thing to point out about this. So Meta had spoke to investors at their earnings call in late January about how this year they were going to put significant investment into scaling their smart glasses business. So right now that smart glasses business is just the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, but we know from reliable reports from Bloomberg that they plan to expand that to Oakley Meta glasses later this year, as well as smart glasses with a HUD from Meta that will be, higher priced, higher end products. So they really are going to be focusing heavily on this smart glasses business. And this has started with Super Bowl ads, not one, but two 30-second ads that ran at the Super Bowl featuring A-list celebrities, as you can see on screen right now. Chris Pratt, Chris Hemsworth, and Kris Jenner. I think three Chris's being kind of a joke there. And these ads were directed by Matthew Vaughn, who's the director of the Kingsman franchise. So Meta has likely put several, perhaps tens of millions total into this when you include the cost of production of the ad and of running it at the Super Bowl. And the idea is just to, at the start, I guess, push the idea of these AI smart glasses into the mainstream, introduce it to people, get them used to it. The only time we've seen Meta use celebrity advertising in the past was for Oculus Go. You had Wiz Khalifa, Aquanifa, Jonah Hill, people like that promoting Oculus Go for a lot of the media use cases that we just talked about, actually. So watching immersive video versions of sporting events, watching movies on a giant virtual screen. Ironically, Meta was really focused on this back in the Go days, but the hardware and software just wasn't there to make it compelling yet. And that actually led to this strange period with Quest where Meta withdrew from some of these ideas and actually cancelled and sort of spun down some of these ideas. And then Apple Vision Pro came along and said, well, actually, you can do this. You just have to have a headset that's good and it has to be high quality and you have to actually put in the investment and do it good enough, not just a half-assed effort. And then Meta kind of does this entire tread back on itself with the recent software efforts to bring all this back. But that's completely beside the point. The point is this was the last time we saw celebrity advertising. Oculus Go obviously did not live up to expectations. And now we're not seeing advertising from celebrities for Quest, but we are glasses. So the big question is, are smart glasses like the Ray-Ban Meta glasses ready for this kind of mainstream exposure?
Yeah, better than the cringe Meta Quest at the last Super Bowl. So it seems to me like Meta is supporting 3 platforms that are anemic for revenue to Meta. So Horizon Worlds, Quest headsets, and Ray-Ban glasses. These are 3 product lines, services, however you want to talk about them, that Meta is investing huge sums in. The Ray-Ban glasses come from a different company. The Horizon Worlds are all unmonetized at this point. And then here is the Quest ecosystem. And like, it seems like Meta is moving on from the idea that VR gaming is going to move the needle when it comes to the idea that it's going to get them to the scale that they want. How do you feel about that? Did I word that carefully enough?
I mean, I don't think we can say anything about that based on this, right? It is interesting that commenter pointed out that there was a Quest ad at the Super Bowl a few years ago. It wasn't last year, but it was, I think, the year before. It was that really weird Questies ad that was kind of like an advertisement for Horizon Worlds, but with ridiculous CGI graphics. That I think the biggest reaction to this ad back then was, what the F are they actually advertising here? What is this? I don't know what this is.
And the Andrew Bosworth Science Center is what I thought it was advertising. Where is the Andrew Bosworth Science Center?
What? I don't understand.
Okay, well, in this ad, I think there's a scene where they're going into a science center, like at the beginning of this ad, they're like showing what it looks in the world, and the camera's panning or whatever, and you see Bosworth Science Center in the background on the wall. It's a little itty bitty Easter egg that like maybe Andrew Bosworth would have built a science center, and it's a little thing I remember from this ad is like, that's kind of, there is no Bosworth Science Center. Is he going to make one? All right.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to this, I think I don't think the fact that Meta is investing in smart glasses means that they're also not going to invest in VR and mixed reality. I don't think this is an either or thing. I've said this on previous shows, but the idea that the narrative that some people have spun up here is that they're investing in glasses, therefore they're not going to invest in headsets anymore. Let's put this into context. Q4 2024 was their highest revenue ever. Quest 3S was the highest selling console on Amazon in 2024. There is huge growth potential. They haven't even put eye tracking into the headsets yet, other than Quest Pro, where it wasn't used for the kind of gaze and pinch interaction system that's really compelling on Vision Pro. They haven't gotten to codec avatars. They're still quite early, right? We're talking about this like we're already in the 2030s. And as I've said before, on pretty much every earnings call that he was asked, Mark Zuckerberg has said over and over again, look, this is a business that we expect to bring actual returns starting in the 2030s. So we're only in 2025, right? We're far along in some ways, but standalone VR with 6DoF tracking has only existed on Meta's business for 6 years, right? That sounds like a lot if you look at technology in the context of the smartphone revolution, which artificially decides that the iPhone was the first smartphone, but that's only if you use that word smartphone. In reality, the iPhone was the culmination of decades of pocket computers, and mobile computers in general. It was not the start. It was kind of one of the last iterations of a very long idea. When you look at what we have today, there's still so much low-hanging fruit that I don't think Meta is anywhere near ready to give up. I don't think that's what this says, but I do think that they say that there's one massive thing that's changed. Originally, they thought that for glasses to be compelling, you would need augmented reality features, and that's going to take a lot of money and a lot of investment. But with the kind of ace in the hole, the unexpected advancement of large language models in recent years, in their iteration, Meta AI, powered by their Llama series of models, they found that you can actually make a compelling smart glasses product with no display at all. And that doesn't mean they won't make glasses with a display. They do plan we've got 5 or 6 different sources now that say that they plan to release HUD glasses later this year and AR glasses in 2027. But it does mean that they will have a product line here which is relatively low cost, relatively wide appeal, and that they can push out. But as I always say, Samsung can make fridges and TVs. It can make tablets and phones. A car company can make trucks and SUVs, right? It's not this either or narrative that people want to force into this. I don't think is right, because it's in the same way that today people use phones a lot, sure, but they also use laptops. You want to be able to have ideally both, and I think they're going to try to be in both.
There's so many ways I could take this, and we've actually made really good time here, David, on this show at 51 minutes, even with my tangents on the Andrew Bosworth Science Center. I don't know. We should move on to these last 3 subjects, but there's a lot to consider. One of the things I was thinking about why I use my phone, David, and why we all depend on our phones, like why they're integrated in our lives this way. And there's a strong case to be made that it's, for most people, the only device they'll ever own that has a redundant internet connection. And I want us all to ponder that for a minute, right? Like, I use my phone. It's like my most used device, partially because when the Wi-Fi goes down, I'm still online, right? Like, and there's redundant situations at home, server farms where you need redundant lines to the internet and stuff like that. But for most humans, the phone has the dual connections. And I don't know. Like, I'm with you, David, that I love my laptop too, but it's always this part of this tension that we always argue. Like, is a VR headset more like a phone or is it more like a PC? Well, maybe it should have redundant internet connections, and then I don't really care. I don't know.
Well, sure, but you can get tablets that have a 5G or LTE connection, and you can even get certain laptops that have that, and maybe Apple at one point will do that to the MacBook. I think what really makes your phone the omni tool, the everyday device, is that it's portable, right? It fits in your pocket. You can take it everywhere with you. There's no weight, essentially. It just feels like having almost nothing on you. It's not like if you were to have a backpack with your laptop, and it's frictionless as well. That's the other thing. You take your phone out of your pocket, and either Face ID or Touch ID, depending on what kind of device you have, unlocks it, and it's instantly there ready to go, right? You want to Google something or send someone a message, you pull it out of your pocket and you go. That's what makes the smartphone the dominant computing device, as well as the fact that it's covered in every sensor you need, right? From GPS to cameras on each side to all of that.
I love that, but I did the jump in college. I was the first one in my college group to go get an iPhone, and the reason I went and got it, the reason that it pushed it was absurd. Everything about it was absurd. Pricing, it's still as absurd as the Apple Vision Pro is today. But the reason I did it is Steve Jobs negotiated a breakthrough deal with AT&T to make sure that every one of those iPhones came with an unlimited data connection, and we were promised it, even though it was it's the slowest possible thing on earth. It was the data connection that lured me over. And I don't know, if you have the latest iPhones, they connect via satellite in emergency situations. So now you have a third redundant way of connecting even when you're not go. So it integrates the iPhone even more into this emergency status, like it's always going to be with you, part of your life. And so, yeah, you're right about I'm glad we got our chart up there. They were asking it for us earlier in the show. If you want to explain the chart for the new people out there.
Well, yeah, I want to respond directly though and say that I do think that it's going to be critical for Meta to eventually get LTE or ideally 5G connection built into these smart glasses. A huge flaw of them today is that they are so reliant on your phone. They are not standalone devices, right? You can't really call the Ray-Ban glasses standalone glasses, even though they are only simple smart glasses. Any query that is more complicated than like what time is it or read that last message doesn't get processed on device. It gets done on Meta's servers via your phone as the intermediary. And for all sorts of reasons, Apple and Google lock down how much it can communicate between the device and the phone. And so that brings, huge kind of disadvantages there. If you did have a class of L, if it even was via a puck, like we see with the Orion prototype, that would allow, really significant advancements. And it's like, when we talk about could anything even remotely come close to replacing a phone, I think people have this binary idea of like either it will or it won't. In reality, there will be what percentage of the time do you leave your house without your phone? And today, for a lot of people, that's 0%. But I would say for some Apple Watch owners, especially those who have an LTE connection on their Apple Watch, that might be 5%. With them. In fact, they'll just have, some Apple Music, maybe you can buy. When you have smart glasses that have their own standalone LTE connection, that can run apps and, have your podcasts and your music and your sports tracking built into them, maybe you do just run out the door with your glasses on and not put the phone in your pocket. I think it'll be interesting to see whether these smart glasses with a HUD that we expect to arrive later this year from Meta introduce that idea. Maybe they're kind of like introducing the idea of these being standalone computing devices rather than just accessories to your phone.
So it sounds like your audio just went funky during that last section for a few minutes. Let me know if I am back on the way it should be here as we go. Apparently, David, I can't wait to see what that glitch looked like on the stream because people describe it with quite disturbing terms out there. Yeah, there was a lot I was thinking about. Okay, yeah. So I have an article that I've prepped about SideQuest that I'm getting ready to put out there. I wanted to get out there before this. Just going further into the layoffs there. I've got some sourcing out there indicating that it was double-digit layoffs at SideQuest. And in that piece, the reason I wrote it was because we received video showing a conversation Shane Harris, the CEO of SideQuest, had with the Banter community, basically describing all of the things that SideQuest is encountering, all of their decision making, to put this up on all their decision making at SideQuest behind the layoffs that they've had recently, as well as focusing on the Banter social network and whatnot. Yeah, we did not plan to cover this, so I guess we're going to give a little section to this, but the part of that article that the reason I'm bringing this up is we have to provide a holistic view of the VR market, and it isn't all about Meta. It isn't all about Meta. So if you are tied to Meta, things could be difficult for you as Meta changes plans, but not necessarily everyone is tied to Meta. And in that article, I broke down something we haven't seen yet. So as negative as you want to be about Meta, you can go out and be as negative as you want to be, and you have every right to be, right? Like they've shifted strategies every 6 months for the past decade in VR. It's like a recurring thing, and it's always hard to stay caught up. So all of that is still true. But if you're in our audience, if you're obsessed with VR, you probably have not tried or seen all of Meta's most advanced technologies. Yeah, you've tried the Quest 3 because that is the best technology they could ship at the prices they want to achieve. But you haven't had time with their wristband technology, and you haven't had time with their codec avatar technology. You put The wristband technology that we talk about off and on this show, together with the avatar technology that actually makes David look like David, makes me look like me. You get those things combined with a headset, and then you start assessing whether Mark Zuckerberg misspent $150 billion. But I don't think we judge whether that money was misspent or is in the wrong direction until we see the wristband, the codec avatars, and the eye-tracked VR headset from Meta all putting together in one demo, one polished demo.
Yeah, and the AR glasses, right? Because this is why it's so absurd to make any conclusions yet or talk about Meta winding all this down in 2025. The majority of Meta's spending on XR has been on the AR glasses product that doesn't exist yet, right? They haven't even launched the product that they're spending most of their money on, right? So this is why to me, I sometimes you can hear the frustration in my voice of when we're talking about this in the past tense. Folks, this is barely just started. We're still in the early days. This is a multi-decade project. The idea here is, how much would a company spend to go back in time and be the one that owns iOS or Android? How much would you spend to own the future of computing? That's the question here. And I think if you look at that scale, what Meta's spent so far, which is just under 100 billion, and that's everything. That's its spending on Quest, Horizon, AR glasses, absolutely everything since acquiring Oculus and including acquiring Oculus. I think most companies would spend at that scale if they had the ability to convince investors that they could spend at that scale and win. And Zuckerberg doesn't need to convince investors because he owns the company. He is the controlling stakeholder, so he doesn't need to. But if it feels, right? 100%. But if they succeed, they will look back at this period of spending and think this was just completely worth it. It's whether you call this an investment or a loss depends on what scale you're looking at it. And sure, if you look in and you're looking at between 2025 and 2020 as your viewpoint, sure, that's a massive loss. It's a boondoggle. But zoom out a bit and look on the scale of 2014 to 2040, the Oculus acquisition to 2040, and things might look very, very different.
Appreciate that. And thank you to Parmesan for supporting us during this episode. Saying thank you again for the best journalism in XR. And frankly, these days, some of the most honest and reliable journalism, period. Thank you. That is what we are trying to do. So it is good to hear someone recognize that out there. So spot on. So hopefully we keep hitting that mark for you in the future. Thank you to our members for supporting us in all that we do. And please consider becoming a member to support our work going forward. We're moving on here to our last three subjects here as a big subject. I just wanted to cover that SideQuest thing, and thanks for giving me the space to get into that, David. We'll have an article up on that as soon as we can, getting into that further. But it's a complicated thing, right? Companies that are tied to Meta are having a very, very tough time of it. But we need to contextualize that, and the two subjects away, these next two subjects both indicate big projects that are happening this year with VR headsets that are kind of changing the story, right? Like anyway, sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was just going to read out a comment here from Guy Godin, the developer of Virtual Desktop, saying, except with the quality of Meta's software, calling it the future of computing is a joke. And, you make a very good point there that Meta's software quality in this industry has left a lot to be desired, to say the most optimistically. And what I would say, though, is if you look in the past 2 or 3 years, the experience of using a Quest 3 years ago and of using it today is dramatically better, right? They have made improvements, but it's still not good enough, right? There's still significant software quality problems. But the thing is that this isn't unprecedented. There's this incredible movie that I'd really recommend anyone interested in the type of things we talk about on this show, the history of adoption of technology and platforms, that I recommend watching, called Pirates of Silicon Valley. And it's about, I think it was released in the late 90s, and it's about how Bill Gates and Steve Jobs took the ideas of Xerox PARC's research lab and turned them into products, and it dramatizes a lot of the kind of fight between them in a really great way that some of the people who were involved back then have said is one of the most accurate movies about this, or fictional representations of any sort, be it movie or book or podcast, about this era. And there's an incredible period where Jobs realizes that Steve Jobs realizes that Bill Gates has basically got Windows ready to go with a bunch of these same ideas on all of these cheap Japanese manufactured PCs that are ready to flood the market. And the fictional Jobs turns around and tells Gates, we're better than you. We've got better stuff. And Bill Gates turns around, or the fictional Bill Gates, and says, you don't get it, Steve. That doesn't matter. So the point here is Windows software quality for years was awful, right? Like the experience of using Windows, especially if you go to like the Vista era or the Windows 8 era, there were times where it was genuinely quite terrible to use. And I say this as a lifelong Windows user who still uses Windows today. There were times where it was awful, and there still are times today when using Windows is awful, and yet 90% of PCs out there run Windows. Android, right? I say this as someone who's used Android for more than a decade. I've used all sorts of Android phones from all sorts of manufacturers, Samsung, Motorola, Google. There was a time in the early 2010s when using an Android phone was awful. The software experience of it was downright terrible. And a lot of the time, you would say to yourself, I'm accepting these trade offs because I want the openness and I want the ability to have more freedom than what I have with iOS. Now, iOS is massively improved what it lets you do as a user, but 10 years ago, it was still very much so the Jobsian idea of being locked down. The point I'm trying to make here is that the idea that because software quality is low means that something cannot achieve mass market scale or won't be adopted by people simply isn't true. The software quality, unfortunately, is not the number one consideration for most consumers. And there are a lot of people who use shitty software today at bigger scale than higher quality software. So just comes back to that moment in that movie. You don't get it, Steve. That doesn't matter.
Goodness. Oh, man, there's a couple ways to go in this. And I appreciate David bringing up that context of the early days. And I don't know if I can't think of offhand an example from those early days of like a technology route that died, Betamax, right? That's not fair. That's not the right analogy for this. But there were other technologies that came around and failed, and companies lost billions based on those ideas. And one of the things that David and I, well, let's talk about Android. Let's talk about when we get to Android. Let's get to Android XR next, David.
Sure. Yeah, let's get into that topic. So the news here is that Google has confirmed that developers on Android XR will get access to the pass-through camera view. So you'll have to request the camera permission, just like on your phone. If you have a phone, either iPhone or Android, and an app wants to use your camera, it asks, can I use the camera? You hit allow, and it gets access. So Google has confirmed that Android XR, the same thing will happen. If they request the camera 0, the rear camera, just like on a phone, they'll get your view of the world, right? Your first person view. If they request the selfie camera, they will get the same thing you get on Vision OS, a virtual avatar view, which will depend on which avatar provider you have. It sounds like Google is going to make it available that you can choose your avatar provider, just like you can choose default apps in a bunch of different operating systems. So this is something that Meta announced at Connect is going to come to Quest. So Quest headsets are going to have a pass-through API that lets you, as a developer, use the pass-through view. Apple currently allows it only for enterprise. So if you're an enterprise company and want to make an internal app not on the public app store, you can access the pass-through cameras, but otherwise you can't. And so in general, whether it be Android XR or Quest, Horizon OS, or Vision OS, this seems set to open an entirely new type of application for the industry, right? These mixed reality headsets that we see today, all developers get today are like your hand skeleton coordinates, your head and hand tracking. They get a 3D mesh of the room, but they don't get raw camera access. They can't run their own machine learning models. So I expect once we see this unleashed on developers, you're going to see a wave of new ideas that simply have not been possible with today's headset. And that's going to be quite exciting from an industry perspective of covering it, as well as for developers. There are unicorns that will be built around this idea, right? Having this ability to get raw access and run your own computer vision models on first person view of reality, this is going to be huge for developers.
It's going to be very, very interesting to watch. The security concerns that come up when that happens, The lack of camera access being there has been a top security concern at Apple. It's been a top security concern at Meta. Um, and I think it's interesting. How would you how would you convey whether VR requires cameras
You mean in general? Like,
for operating for 6 DoF tracking?
sure, yeah. So, I mean, there is uh, certainly no cheaper way that we know of. And when you come from like a cost, convenience perspective, being able to stick a few cameras on a headset and get head tracking, mixed reality, hand tracking, controller tracking on really cheap controllers that just flash some IR LEDs. Cameras currently are absolutely critical to VR or mixed reality headsets, whatever you want to call them. The difference is that right now, today, only the system gets real access to them and developers don't.
Yeah. The thing that I was looking for, which you danced around. You gave a very good answer, but like it isn't technically required though that it be cameras that provide 6 DoF tracking.
Sure, you could have like the Steam VR Lighthouse system. Of course, there are other ideas of how to use base stations and do kind of more passive hardware as well. But you're only going to get 6 DoF tracking. Then you don't get pass through. You don't get hand tracking. You don't get, you know, mixed reality scene meshing. You would have to do dedicated sensors for all of these different things. You would end up with like a headset that's thousands of dollars, but not because of its screens, just because you're adding all of these fancy sensors to do what you could have done with $15 of cameras.
What a fantastic transition to our next subject there, David. Are we ready to talk about that one yet? Or is there something you want to discuss here first?
Yeah, no, I guess the one thing we should say is, of course, as you point out, there is a privacy trade-off here, right? That's what Meta has been struggling with and wanting to bring it out. It's what Apple obviously is struggling with to keep it for enterprise only. There's a privacy trade-off, but the people who are in favor of this would argue, you ask the user, right? It's not like they still have to bring up a prompt in front of you saying, do you want this app to access your camera? Um, and just like on your iPhone today, you see a little dot in the corner, colored dot, or your Android phone, you see a colored dot when it is accessing your camera. It's possible that that will be built into this, right? You may see like an overlay dot. It may just be part of your menu bar. Meta has that today for the microphone, right? If you open the Quest menu bar and an app is using your microphone, you'll see it. So right now, if I open the Quest menu, I see a little purple dot, and I can actually click on that purple dot in quick settings, and it shows me that UploadVR Studios is using my microphone. So it may be the same case with the camera. But yeah, I just want to point out that Onakazi makes a good point in the comments saying that if Meta had done this before anyone else, they would have been roasted in the media. Everyone would, you'd get articles about, oh, your Quest headset can see your room. So I'm sure they're gonna take some flack for this, right? At Google or Meta or whoever is actually the first to have it out there is going to take some flack for this.
You're right. There's a double-edged sword there, though. With Meta, Meta clearly knows that people don't trust the company. They've made products for years with things like physical camera sliders over their portal calling devices that were in clear recognition that people just wholly rejected the idea that Meta is putting this many cameras in their devices. I sat on a call, one of the few, very, very few times I ever visited the physical office years ago in this company, or the previous version of this company, was to be on a phone call with, I think it was Nate Mitchell, co-founder at Oculus, as he debated the definition of a sensor versus a camera with us when it came to the Oculus sensors that were used to track the original Rift. So I just want to throw that out there. Like, the amount of access you as a user actually have to the sensing apparatus kind of changes whether it's a camera or a sensor to you.
Yeah, I think, in that era when we were just doing object tracking, right, the headsets and controllers, you can get away with this idea of, you put an IR filter over it, it only sees in IR at normal operation unless you hack it or something to do a really wide exposure. But in this era, like, you're trying to get to this question of like, do we need these cameras? in this era where mixed reality and pass-through is so essential of part of these headsets, I think we're beyond that. And I think what you see happen here is that the cultural conversation changes slowly over time. And Apple Vision Pro, for example, introduced to the public the idea that a headset would have a completely black front plate and have cameras hidden under it. And that, for example, may inform Meta's future hardware design, right? Today you can see it on screen right now, the Quest 3S, the cameras are meant to look very clear. Meta has this design philosophy of you must know that we have cameras in front of this. We'll make the whole thing white and the camera's black and you can't miss it. But of course, as I've pointed out in the past, that makes them look effing ugly. And that I think that maybe matters more, right? It matters more that people don't want to wear ugly things on their face. It's a lot of our audience maybe aren't kind of thinking like that, but that is how the mass market is thinking. And so you have all of these trade-offs. Privacy is always traded off against something, right? You don't get privacy for free. If you even, for example, in mobile operating systems in the past 10 years that have added all these privacy features, now we live in sort of the nagscape of you can't even like open a food delivery app and without telling it 10 times, yes, I wanted to access my location. Yes, yeah, I'm fine with this food delivery app that I'm ordering food to my house to know where I am, where my house is. Yes. And then you open it after 2 months and it says, oh, you haven't given this app permission in a while. Are you sure you still want it to open? Like everything's the point I'm trying to make more general here is privacy is always traded off against something. And if we want developers to have more freedom, there's going to be a privacy trade-off.
I don't think the privacy. Part of this reporting that we're going to have to be on is, as the social networks are filled with bots and it becomes harder to identify human from bot, and they seem to be trying or effectively devaluing the value of human interaction by inserting all of these fake things into our bots. Like, where does that leave us? Where do we go with some of this? I don't know. Sorry, there's. I see our rise in AI generation, everything that we see out there, as partially a response to Apple making this the standard of our lives, the permission for everything that you just described as a friction, as a frustration, a daily one that happens for many people, all valid. But I'm going to argue that the flip side of that is all of your information getting consumed and then trained on and converted into something else for use by business intelligence out there. But whatever, that's another conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about here. It's right that you're taking your time to kind of formulate thoughts here. This is really deep stuff, right? And there will probably be a scandal around this, right? There will be some company is going to put out a Quest or Android XR or Vision OS eventually when it can do this, or all of the above app that, maybe some Chinese company gives you some free functionality that Western app was going to charge $20 for, except it comes out a few months later that they were pulling images of your room and using it to train their own computer vision model, right? It's going to happen at some point. This is it's naive to say that there will be no company that will exploit this. It's just this is something that we'll have to keep in mind. It will happen.
So the reason so we're going to transition to our last two subjects here, and this one we're going to get into next is probably one of the biggest headlines ever to have on UploadVR.com because of the implied significance of what follows it. But I took this space with the cameras to talk about the Steam VR laser base stations, and I want to give a little story here of going and trying my first Vive demo. So I went to Weaver headquarters down in Venice, California, down near the beach, and I have a little hands-on where I tried to convey this hands-on experience of going to their offices, going up the stairs, and seeing a room-scale room that's been cut out for VR for the first time, and there's just a massive pile of wires on the floor. And then you look up and you see the little laser base station floating up there with a little light on it, letting you know it's there. And you start looking at it and you start going, you wonder, I know in my heart that that's a laser. I've been told that that's a laser, a spinning light inside of the box. But wouldn't it make sense if Valve put a camera in there to make sure that people are keeping their secrets? maybe I should choose my words a little bit more, a little carefully while I'm in front of this laser base station for the very first time, because I don't want to get anyone here in trouble because I've made them share too much information with me. Point is, a lot of people when they look up and see that laser base station, they don't know what the heck it is. It might as well be a camera to some people, but it's not. It's not. Fundamentally, it's not. And if you just want to go into a room and sit in a chair for a good 8 hours and drive an F1 car on the racetracks of your dreams in a chair, you don't necessarily need cameras. You can just have the laser base stations tracking your head movements without that invasiveness in your mind.
Sure, but with cameras, you can use virtual desktop to mask out your wheel so you can see it and not be kind of fumbling around of where are my controls, right? You can see your real cockpit and then everywhere else see the virtual world, right? There are all these advantages. You could have, in the future, we could have automatic computer vision tracking of the wheel to align it perfectly to the virtual wheel, right? There's so many. I just think XR is so inexorably linked to cameras because of all of the computer vision you can do. All the things you talk about with tracked objects, right? The idea of being able to, when you play walkabout mini golf, instead of picking up a controller of any sort, pick up your real golf club and just start putting in your room. All of that's going to come, but it's not going to come through laser base stations. It's going to come through better and better cameras and faster chips and better computer vision models.
And I get that. And the reason we...
Sorry, I was just going to say there's something we could see with this, right? Just an idea, right? There's no reason that Walkabout Mini Golf or Golf Plus couldn't hire a few computer vision engineers and use this Passthrough API to do golf club tracking, for example.
So people are talking about virtual desktop and having pass-through areas, and I know that's in some other apps as well. Very, very cool feature. And you're absolutely right, David. But as we transition to this next subject, and I have to take this time with our audience to get this across. What I argue, David, is you don't need the cameras, right? Technically speaking, you don't need the cameras for virtual reality. I have to yes, you're right that it's going to win, but you don't need it. And when we go to the next phase and we talk about all the things that the cameras do bring, I want there to be a line in the sand in our minds between what the cameras give us and what the VR headset gives us just by virtue of it being a VR headset. It's a transportive device. We pass through virtual reality to get to all the camera features and pass through and mixed reality and all the things you're talking about. But I have to, I need to hammer this home and philosophically or whatever, prove me wrong, right? But you're passing through VR to get to the augmentations on the other side of it is my philosophical thing. So am I wrong on that, David? Are we going to fight live with this audience as we talk about Anduril?
I mean, passing through VR, I think that's semantics, right? Whether you want to say, practically from a consumer perspective, we debated this before. You start up your Apple Vision Pro, and as soon as it actually boots, right, you see a flashing Apple logo on blackness, and then you see pass-through. You don't see VR. You same thing with your Quest headset. You see a flashing Meta logo, and then you see pass-through. And in practical sense, from an end user perspective, you start in pass-through, you exist in the menu in pass-through, and if you want to go into a VR experience, you launch an app and you're brought into VR. But you could easily design a system the other way around, right?
Well, I mean, what my point being is that Big Screen Beyond is that system, right? You go into a Big Screen Beyond and all you get is the startup logo, and that's where you are the entire time you're there, right? That's the difference in technology.
You're in VR, right? Yeah, you're in virtual reality. And and you're absolutely right to say it is entirely possible to build the minimum viable functionality of VR without cameras, as we did have in the HTC Vive era, as the Valve Index does. Even though these things do have cameras, they're not necessary. You could rip out the cameras and they would still work just as well. But the cost of doing that is, part of the reason why those things were never mass adopted, right? Each base station, the base stations together, the two base stations that you need at a minimum costing as much as the entire Quest 3S is the answer to why. Let's really not get into this tangent, but I would bet that Valve's Deckard is going to be covered in cameras, right? Of course it is.
Oh yeah. So like at the Index launch event that I went and checked out at Valve, I remember that this was the famous thing I remember in my mind of just one of the Valve engineers was like, "We know what the value of computer vision is," and then the people next to the Valve person like shut him up, like, "Don't go on. You don't need to be telling the journalists here anything more than is necessary regarding our future and what we think about everything." But all right, let's get into Palmer Luckey's Anduril and give a real explanation of why I'm harping on this before we actually get into it, because I think it's going to be the subject of our time, the next decade of conversation. What does it mean to be augmented, and have augmentation? So, David, break this down for us.
Sure, I'm just having trouble bringing up the image. Are you able to bring it up on your tablet?
Let me see here if I've got it here.
Oh, hang on, I've got it. I've got it. My bad. I've got it now. It's just a little delay. Should be coming up now. Sorry about the delay here, folks. Seems to be
Yeah, there we go. I got it.
a little lag with the backend system. Okay, so the news here is that Palmer Luckey's Anduril, his defense company, has now taken over the IVAS project from Microsoft. So a little background in case all of these words and names mean nothing to you. The Integrated Visual Augmentation System, IVAS, contract is a US Army project that was first announced back in 2018. In 2021, the contract was awarded to Microsoft with a stated value of up to $22 billion over 10 years for more than 10,000 headsets. The eventual long-term goal of this program is to put an AR headset on every US Army soldier that will vastly improve their situational awareness in combat and greatly enhance their training in peacetime. So some of the previously reported use cases for IVAS include overlaying icons on friendly units, objectives, threats, and points of interest, right? The kind of thing you would have in a video game, except in real life. So, you're seeing, when you see like a plane fly over, a helicopter or whatever, you're seeing a little blue tag that shows you that's friendly. When there's a squad 2 kilometers over, you're seeing a little, icon in the air pointing down to them, meaning that hypothetically with a system like this, you're never going to have friendly fire incidents, because this would also be integrated, of course, with what the pilots in the sky are wearing when they're looking down. Essentially, kind of like battle space management of the kind you would get in a video game, but in real life. Also, you would have, of course, built-in night vision and thermal view modes, picture-in-picture feeds from drones, including the Soldier-Borne Sensor SBS personal drone. That's a project to give every soldier a drone, right? So it's attached to your chest. It's this little thing that charges in the same kind of power bank you would be carrying for your headset. You fling the drone into the air and it goes off and does some fast recon. You get a picture-in-picture view. Simulated weapons and enemies for training exercises. So you can do training cheaper and better by having the enemies be simulated, scanning nearby people for signs of illness, such as their high temperature, facial recognition for hostage rescue situations, right? You go in, you want to see, have you definitely got the right hostages? All kinds of things like that in terms of like AI threat analysis. These are all the goals of IVAS. So Microsoft had this contract for years, but there seemed to be significant problems. So Microsoft's system was a heavily modified version of HoloLens 2 that had wider field of view. And from what I've heard, although this isn't public, the HoloLens IVAS used silicon carbide lenses, just like in Meta's Orion, right, to get this wider field of view that you can't get in glass waveguides. But there seemed to be significant issues. In 2022, the US Congress rejected further orders because there were mission affecting physical impairments, including headaches, eye strain, and nausea. Previous evaluations had found reliability issues with essential functions sometimes failing. In 2023, Microsoft upgraded IVAS to improve reliability, low light sensor performance, and form factor, but it seems it wasn't enough. So the first sign that something was going to really change here was back in September, as we talked about in this show, when Anduril was announced to provide some software for IVAS, its lattice networked battle space system. So some context, when Palmer Luckey was fired from Oculus, Luckey was the co-founder of Oculus. Oculus came on to be Meta's Reality Labs. If you're not familiar with the story today, that's what Oculus has sort of morphed into. He was fired from Oculus and he went on to found Anduril, a defense company And their primary product is Lattice, this software system that fuses together all of the sensors and all of the communications from all of these different military platforms into this giant integrated AI-based battle space management system. And to now, Anduril provides all kind of hardware products from different kinds of drones to, drones that fly, drones with rotors, drones with jet engines, missiles that take off, and if they don't hit things, land, underwater submarine drones, all of these kind of things. And it was recently valued at 28 billion, which is crazy, right? So he founded this company, Oculus, that gets acquired for around 2 to 3 billion. Now Anduril's worth 28 billion. But Anduril has now fully taken over this project, so they will do the hardware and the software for this. And Microsoft will still be around somewhat. Anduril has said that it will use Microsoft's Azure to run AI models that it can't run on device. So when it's integrating all of this data in the battle space and it needs to do something really high-end with high-end AI models, it will use Microsoft's Azure cloud. But you really should go and read Luckey's announcement for this, because there are some really crazy phrases in here. He talks about turning war fighters into technomancers that pair up with weaponized robotics. He says, since my pre-Oculus days as a teenager who had the opportunity to do a tiny bit of work on the Army's Bravemind project, I believed there would be a headset on every soldier long before a headset on every civilian. The IVAS program is one of the most important programs to the Army. It represents just the beginnings of a new path in human augmentation, one that will follow America's warfighters to surpass the limitations of human form and cognition, seamlessly teaming enhanced humans with large packs of robotic and biologic teammates. And so while they haven't said anything about the specs or hardware path for Anduril's IVAS, Luckey has said to multiply your expectations by 10 and then do it again, and has described himself as the best head-mounted display designer in the world.
Yeah, I was serious as a I was as serious as a very serious illness through most of your speech there, David. And then I laughed at the end because of him describing himself as the best headset designer in the world. Very, very clear strategy book he's pulling from there in calling himself that. This image on the right we need to talk about here is. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Sorry, I think you were going to say exactly what I was going to say. I shouldn't have interrupted you. This is obviously a reference and echo to Luckey's 2015 Time magazine cover, The Surprising Joy of Virtual Reality and Why It's About to Change the World. This was his cover he did when he was 22. He was still the figurehead of Oculus. They were getting ready to launch the Rift. And now you see, what is this now, 10 years later, the same iconography, that's not the right word, the same visual language in this IVAS cover from Luckey.
And critically, in both images, they are real photos. The first one, I was told the background was from a Facebook luau event, actually draped behind the scene. And this is one of their LED display boards, panels at Anduril, I believe, behind Luckey. And this isn't actually a captured real photo of him wearing this hardware, according to them. So the questions in our comments that we need to address. First one, where is it? When does this go from being military hardware to police hardware? That's the most important question in anyone's mind, I think. David, what do you think on that? And do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, we haven't seen any announcement from Anduril that they intend to use this for law enforcement. Right now, their focus is as a defense contractor in military. I think given, if you look at the scale of this money-wise, right, this contract is worth up to 22 billion over 10 years. That's kind of the third biggest thing in the history of XR, right? The biggest thing is Meta's total investment, which is just under 100 billion. The second biggest is Apple's investment in Vision Pro. Estimates put that between 20 and 30 billion. And then in that same range, you get this contract. So I think they're going to be more than focused on trying to deliver this, right? This is, as Luckey says, this is what he's been wanting to do his kind of entire life. I think maybe if this is successful, you see this kind of thing brought in for law enforcement, but it's probably less useful in that context, right? If you're law enforcement, you're in like a city or a town where you know your surroundings, you know, you kind of have less of a need for like hyper situational awareness. It really, this kind of thing makes a lot more sense when you're in the chaos that is a modern battlefield, right? Where you have, hundreds of friendlies and hundreds of enemies, and then you have dozens or hundreds or thousands of drones and missiles and aircraft. It's that kind of chaos, right? If you talk to people and you look at the kind of interviews of people who have been in combat in these wars, situational awareness really is one of the kind of limiting factors for modern warfare, and has been for a very, very long time. And that's kind of what they're looking to attack here.
So I need to talk about the sci-fi comments in our comments. And I also want to talk about Scott's comment here. Unless you have a negative opinion of law enforcement, why would they not have the best tech to stop criminals? Well, elsewhere in these comments, you see people mentioning Starship Troopers and Stormtroopers. And I'm going to make a joke here, but it's going to allude to a very serious thing. Maybe the Stormtroopers had such bad aim in the Star Wars movies because their pass-through was poorly calibrated. Maybe their VR headsets with pass-through was just not set right. Maybe it was offset by a couple feet. Maybe someone at the VR headset design factory for the Stormtroopers specifically put an offset in what the cameras provide through their faceplate on the Stormtrooper's outfit in order to make them all miss when they're shooting at the good guys. That's my headcanon now on why the Stormtroopers are so bad. But other people are talking about Johnny Rico from Stormtrooper from Starship Troopers. They're imagining that in their heads.
Luckey did actually reference Starship Troopers in his announcement post, which is interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to be going and reading the original Starship Troopers book very soon because I know it's very different from the movie, and the movie itself is very memorable. But you've got this very real situation, and I've argued it with a couple people out there, and like we can do this a couple ways, guys. But like, what is Iron Man's display system? Is it magic? Okay, yes, it's movie. It's comic book magic. It's movie magic is what Iron Man's display system is. But if you're going to if you're going to try to make Iron Man's suit in the physical world, you're going to give a person a suit of armor. You're going to give them a VR headset inside that suit of armor, and then you're going to give them a crap load of cameras to sense the world outside of that suit of armor.
So that's something that brings up an issue that we don't know what Anduril's approach is here. Palmer Luckey, as an individual, has made numerous statements over the years in support of camera pass-through and against transparent waveguide optics. And we've talked on this show many, many times about the advantages of camera pass-through over transparent optics. But that doesn't mean that Anduril is going to use this. It doesn't mean that the US Army is ready for that. If you look at these images, these both look different, right? It's clear that these are different systems, or at least there's an add-on here. This looks to be, from this very limited angle, it does look to be some kind of opaque system. But again, it's a very limited angle. But this one, there does appear to be a translucency and a glow here. I would imagine that for safety critical reasons, they may, for the first iteration at least, continue on with Microsoft's approach of using transparent optics and waveguides. You would have to. We've talked on this show before about the issues of using camera pass-through in safety critical scenarios, right? So the first is the issue that with today's technology, sure, you can, if you put a lot of cost in, get a very, very high quality image in daylight. But as soon as you go into low light, I guess you can use, night vision, and that kind of overcomes that. But there's still going to be issues where, what if you're in a really bright environment? Maybe they can handle that with software. The real issue, of course, is, what happens if there's a failure, right? If a transparent optic system fails or cuts out or crashes, you just see through, right? You just get the real world with nothing overlaid. That you're back to what you had before. If a camera pass-through system fails, you're in darkness, and that could get people killed in the worst case scenario. Now, you could argue that it's possible to build software that is reliable enough, right? With aircraft fly in the sky, we get on airliners they're running software that, if they were to fail, would cause critical safety issues. And there is such a thing as software that is built robustly enough to not have that happen. The other issue is, of course, you could just build a flip-up system, right? So it does fail, and instantly you just flip it up, and it's out of your way. You're maybe blinded for 1 second, maybe even less, given how, depending on how ready you are for that being an issue. This is going to be a really, really tough debate. And you can see how in the consumer industry, pass-through is what by far and away the better trade-off. But you do have to wonder, is it right for the military space? Luckey, based on his public comments, seems to think so. But I want to be crystal clear. We do not know what Anduril's IVAS is using from a technology perspective yet.
Yeah, and I'll be clear to our audience here, just that I have made the case to get David Heaney's eyes inside IVAS. I'm going to continue to make that case, that I want to see what he thinks of this hardware. I want to see his breakdown of what it's used for, and hopefully we get that sooner or later. So I'm seeing OpsR out there in the comments, digging around with a lot of questions in a lot of different places, and there was one up there that goes hand in hand with what you're just describing, David. That we don't know what kind of optics these are, but they're looking at this going, "This is AR, not VR." That's the very simple look at this, and let's. If you're a couple things, if you're a soldier, or if you're a former Microsoft person who worked on the IVAS program, the IVAS program, when it was just at Microsoft, please reach out to us, talk to us about the program, explain to us exactly what went wrong. We'd like to break that down more. We've done it very carefully on this show again and again. You can email tips@uploadvr.com. dheaney@uploadvr.com is also a very good email address to have and try to get to. But VR versus AR here. I'm not a soldier. I've never been in combat. I've played war games. I've played paintball. I've played shooters, right? That's my world. But a flashbang goes off, right? Explain to me, a flashbang goes off right there in the room. How long am I blinded if I've got unaided eyes?
Yeah, it depends. Usually like 5 to 15, 20 seconds. Depends on how close you are, right?
What happens if I'm wearing a VR headset instead?
That's a good question. I mean, in theory, you get only a momentary flash and then it's good to go again, right? But you could argue, what happens if there are grenades that are designed around these systems, right? What if you have some sort of high frequency RF that tries to, you could have something that sticks to a wall and blasts IR to try and blind a lot of your sensors. We would have to think that, just like every time when something is introduced in the world of warfare, there will be countermeasures introduced as well, right? You'll have blinders that are designed specifically to blind this sort of thing out. It's swings and roundabouts, it's trade-offs. There's always going to be a countermeasure to a measure.
Well, so I was going to argue here. So if I was wearing, so a couple things that I just need to point out in the grand scheme of things. I already have see in the dark X-ray vision on my Apple Vision Pro. I've turned off all the lights in my house, and I've popped up Figment XR, and I turned on the room meshing feature, and I walked from my office to my bedroom with the lights off in my house, with bright blue light everywhere I'm looking, with solid geometry showing me everywhere I'm about to go as I walked from one room to another. I might as well have been Superman during that moment. I had X-ray vision, and I saw in the dark in a way that I could not. You're talking about the same possible thing here. The other thing I want to bring up regarding the flashbang example. Again, I'm not in battle. I don't know these tools, but I'm going to argue that if I was wearing a Quest 3 right now and that flashbang went off, I would have 0 moments of delay. I would have half a second of delay because the brightness of the VR display is that much lower than real world optics.
No, you're right. There are real advantages to pass-through, as you say, and especially when you have LiDAR meshing, as you say, you can go into a completely dark environment. Now, this already would have, night vision and thermal sensors built in, so that all kind of would be handled there. That's a really thought-provoking thing to say, yes, that for example, flashbangs would be something that would be mitigated here. There are arguments you can give for both. I think a lot of this is going to come down to what happens in field trials, right? As you say, you're not a soldier, I'm not a soldier, Palmer Luckey's not a soldier. What really will matter is when these things are put into trials, what do actual soldiers think of these systems? HoloLens IVAS from Microsoft was absolutely kind of, what's the word, torn apart by the soldiers who tried it. For at least the first iteration, they made some improvements with 1.2, but it just wasn't good enough. The question for these soldiers is: do the drawbacks uh, outweigh the advantages? And everything so far, it appears that the answer is yes. Now, Luckey seems very confident, as the best head-mounted display designer in the world, in his words, that he can be the one who actually gets this over the finish line. Anduril has done some really impressive things and delivered systems where no one else has. So, I did see a comment earlier: why does Luckey think he can do this if Microsoft didn't? Well, Anduril is hiring some of the best people in the world. They're getting rid of all the bureaucracy and, less meetings, more engineering kind of mindset, taking that same approach that SpaceX took to the aerospace industry, but to military contracting. And yeah, you've made the case that I should try this. I would love to try this. There obviously may be, military regulatory reasons that civilians can't try this for quite a while. But if that is something that's available, I would love to try it and see how well does this approach really work.
Yep. So Shala Shaska saying, pretty sure flashbangs aren't defeated by just closing your eyes. That's a good point. There'd be a concussive effect, and there'd be an audio effect, right, that would affect you with those things as well. However, I want to point out that did work in the game last year that closed, that had a bad, the PSVR 2 game. I can't think of the sequel, but you could close your eyes to avoid the effect of a flashbang thrown into the room in a PSVR 2 game quite recently. And that was it's an interesting note of this situation. So I think it's time for our last subject of the day. This is a subject, just on that last subject before we move on, we will be on it. I very proud to work with you, David, on this type of news coverage. I know I take this very, very seriously, and I know David takes it very, 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 very seriously too. And we're going to be on that subject into the future with some of the best reporting in the world. So consider becoming a member or patron to support our work and to support that area of our coverage into the future. I saw on I think there's 5 articles on the military tag on UploadVR.com right now. I think that might change.
Yeah, this does seem like an area where it's going to be more adopted. Some of the use cases we've seen so far include pilot training, right? The headsets are getting good enough that, as we've been discussing in recent months, these things are now getting certified officially to be flight simulators. These aren't just experiments anymore. There are military flight simulators that are using Vario headsets, for example, to train Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16s. Drone pilot training is being done there too. There are experiments around building tanks on armored vehicles where the driver or the commander is wearing a VR headset and using it to see a 360-degree view of the world around them with cameras, right? You take that complete lack of situational awareness that are in traditional armored vehicles where you're kind of just looking through little periscopes and poking your head out and getting shot. Instead, you look around and have a full 360-degree view. These are things that all of the major militaries in the world are experimenting with it, and we do intend to cover it. But with IVAS specifically, because this shift to Anduril now, there's very little information. We want to make clear, some of this is just us talking about speculation. We will bring you real concrete information as soon as it's available out there in public.
Yep. There's lots of speculation for us to have in the future. I'll go so far as to speculate and wonder if Andrew Bosworth's apology to Palmer Luckey last year for his departure was because Andrew Bosworth learned that Palmer Luckey had stopped Meta from being able to make any inroads in the military market and game them by having better hardware that they developed specifically for that purpose. So we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong on that theory, but I'd love to test that hypothesis out over the coming year and see what happens. Let's talk about this John Carmack quote. It's very, very, very grabby, David, and this has been very high interest on our website for a couple of days now. Why don't you break it down for our audience here?
Yeah, so this is actually our most commented on article. In fairness, it's only been around a year, less than a year actually, since we opened up commenting to everyone, not just members. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's been a lot of interest, a lot of controversy, a lot of strong opinions around this. And I am sure that there will be some strong opinions in the comments here as well today. So Here's what Carmack said. I'll read it out first. He said, "Whenever I post something critical of Meta's handling of VR, there are always some old timers that pile on with, yeah, more AAA PC VR games is the way to win. To be clear, standalone VR was the biggest win that VR ever had by a huge margin, and Beat Saber was far more important than Half-Life Alyx. Using a PC to drive VR experiences is a boutique niche, still valuable and definitely worth supporting as a bonus feature, but not something that was going to turn into even console level success, let alone mobile level. The economics of AAA development were never going to be widely brought into bear on a PC accessory. I do think there is an opportunity for AAA content to profitably have VR bonus features, but not fully designed for VR projects at comparable levels of effort."
Yep. People are already starting to do the chat. They're starting to go off on this comment. Lots of different ways to read this, and you can read Carmack's comments a lot of different ways. Yeah, boy, we're doing all the divisive topics today. Laughing out loud. Yep. We're getting into that today. We'll have more of these in the future, I'm sure. So the one commenter was saying that Carmack has made it clear that this what he's saying now is completely in line with the vision he pitched for VR from the very first public demo of Palmer Luckey's Rift kit. Basically, the story goes that Palmer Luckey sent John Carmack one of his first hacked together kits of just some of his pieces. Carmack was messing with his own hardware. I think he was messing with some Sony hardware, trying to turn it into a head-mounted display, a VR headset. And then he took Palmer's hardware to E3, did a big interview, and that interview seeded the market with a lot of bubbling interest, right? I'm assuming David that was when it got on David's radar back in the day, probably got on my radar a little bit from that. That's when I started reporting on Oculus, was right after that. But from that comment, that very first interview, Carmack has been consistent in saying this is his belief that the path is for VR.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a few people who responded to this online saying, oh, that's easy for him to say now. But as you say, Carmack has held this position for over a decade. So in 2012, 13 years ago, before he even joined Oculus, Carmack described his goal as a headset that would use mobile phone hardware along with cameras for positional tracking and no wires. So he described this as his goal back then. And in 2013, while he was the CTO of Oculus, he had joined the company, he even described this ideal headset as running a version of Android. He said, I want the consumer Oculus to be running Android all the way back then. This was something that Carmack has held for so long. He was the spearhead, the driving force behind Samsung Gear VR, that 3DOF phone dock headset that birthed mobile VR. And in fact, you can actually track the lineage of the Quest software, Horizon OS, all the way back from being a feature for that Samsung phone, all the way into Oculus Go, which was basically just a standalone version of Gear VR, through Quest, and then to the Quests that we have today. So Carmack's mobile software that he pushed so hard for, that he cared about so much, is still there in the very foundations of the operating system that you're using if you're using a Quest headset today. So the biggest indication, the first indication, I should say, that Carmack's idea was correct was after the original Oculus Quest launched. So a few months later, after that Quest launched, Carmack was the one who revealed that it was by far the company's most retentive headset yet, surpassing both PC-based Rifts. So he was out there saying the thing that, kind of goes against the narrative you have today of retention, that the original Oculus Quest had higher retention than the Oculus Rift and the Rift S. That's almost heretical to some people who believe that PC VR is actually where the high retention happens. It turns out, at least as of 2019, at that point in time, it was standalone VR. And so then we're now in this era where Meta has sold tens of millions of Quest headsets, vastly eclipsed PC VR. And when you're talking about that comparison that he gave of Half-Life Alyx versus Beat Saber, there's two ways to look at this, right? One is the cultural impact, and you can argue deeply, and I'm sure people will, about which really had the greater cultural impact, which inspired more people to join VR, which has the greater positive impact on the public's view of VR. But on pure numbers, Half-Life Alyx has sold approximately 3 million units. Whereas in contrast, 10 million people have unlocked the first achievement of Beat Saber on Quest alone. And Beat Saber is also on Steam VR and on PSVR, both PSVR headsets. So you can imagine that there's probably 15 plus million Beat Saber owners out there compared to 3 million Half-Life Alyx owners. You could argue that more, like, if you go outside the kind of PC gamer tech enthusiast bubble, more people have heard of Beat Saber, and certainly more people have played Beat Saber than have played Half-Life Alyx. But it's a very interesting and classic Frank Carmackian way of saying this, of just Beat Saber was far more important than Half-Life Alyx.
Fascinating. All right. So, and take a step back and go, okay, over the span of 30 years, which game is going to be played more? Which is going to accrue more human hours spent inside of that particular world? Is it Beat Saber or is it Half-Life Alyx? I don't know, right? Like the math gets really funky, right? You're talking about a multiplayer game that you can get 4 people into a single Beat Saber match. You also have something there that could hypothetically like go out of style because something better comes along than Beat Saber. And then you've got the story driven experience, single player story driven experience that will always run on PC VR. It'll run better on every single PC VR system that comes out, right? Each generation of PC is going to be more capable of running Half-Life Alyx going into the future. So every single time that the people upgrade their PCs, the percentage of people who go and play Half-Life Alyx is going to go up. Like it just feels like there's a very different strategy here in how you want to see your system mature.
Yeah, so I guess Beat Saber is also going to get better in some ways, right? With Quest 3, we saw it jump to 120 hertz. We see constant music packs coming out, right? We've seen all kinds of artists, Britney Spears, Green Day, a bunch of rap artists recently. You can, list them off. But I mean, I think there is an importance to Half-Life Alyx that isn't quite captured in the numbers. I think for a lot of people, perhaps just in the gaming industry, but that's still important for their wider effect on kind of recommending and broadcasting information. Half-Life Alyx proved to a lot of people that VR games can be more than a gimmick. I think there are a lot of people who, before they played Half-Life Alyx, they said, VR is the Nintendo Wii. It's flap around with the motion controller. There's no serious gaming to be had here. And then they played Half-Life Alyx and they said, holy swear word, this is actually a real medium. The potential here is enormous. I can't wait to see what comes next. And unfortunately, as I've ranted before, for Valve, the answer was nothing comes next, or at least not yet, right? They decided that they dropped, one of the greatest games of all time and then disappeared into nothingness, essentially. But that still, it set an expectation, maybe too high, right? Because Valve probably didn't make a profit on Half-Life Alyx. They probably spent more on building it than they made in. But so, like, it's the same thing.
But over the span of time, what happens, right?
Yeah. I mean, in this totality, I guess a lot of it depends on, like, do we get to a world in 5 or 10 years where standalone headsets can run Half-Life Alyx, right? Do we, in the 2030s, does Valve come out with a standalone Steam VR headset that can run it? And then does it become more culturally significant? Or are the mechanics of Half-Life Alyx too dated by then, right? You could argue that some of the mechanics of it are still very kind of first generation VR, and some of the things that people enjoy in the likes of Blade and Sorcery and The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners and Bone Lab and the likes, those kind of mechanics aren't really there in Alyx. It is very safe, right, in some senses. So I think this is a really, really difficult conversation, but I do think that, like, the way that Carmack describes, sort of writes off Half-Life Alyx, technically correct, but on cultural impact, Alyx is more significant than his comments would maybe suggest.
Well, so there was a comment here from a couple people actually speaking my language personally here. They compared my comparison of Beat Saber and Half-Life Alyx to Super Mario Land and Tetris of the 1980s to 1990s. So if you're unfamiliar, those were 2 of the most significant games on the original Game Boy. And that spoke right to my heart. I have put in far more time into Tetris across every platform, every version of Tetris imaginable, right, than I have Super Mario Land. However, I did just put Super Mario Land back in my Game Boy last week, and I played it through from start to finish on the mod Retro Chromatic that Palmer Luckey's also made. And it was a delightful experience after all these years to play a game that's that responsive, like on a cartridge. It just felt so good to play that game. But I love the difference in storytelling. Like there's a start and a finish of Super Mario Land. You're done, you put it away, and you remember it as a very satisfying thing. Tetris, you just play forever. The thing is, I don't play knockoff Tetrises, and there's plenty of knockoff Beat Sabers. Like I'll be pretty satisfied with Synth Riders. So going and spending some time in Synth Riders, and it's not the same game.
Yeah, there's all kinds of analogies you can make like that. You can say more people have played Candy Crush than will ever play God of War or The Last of Us, right? But The Last of Us still has, I would say, probably 10 times as many people have played Candy Crush as The Last of Us, maybe even like 100 times. But The Last of Us still has a cultural legacy, right? It's still, a TV show was spawned out of it. It's so difficult to compare these things, but if you do just talk about like the raw adoption of gaming in general, sure, you could argue Candy Crush was way more important than God of War, The Last of Us, right?
Never played any other match 3 falling block game. Yes, but they don't match. They don't match Tetris. So it's like I don't spend time in them. I put them down after about 15 minutes, and then I go play Tetris Connected again, right from start to finish. I go in that, and the Tetris Connected experience is funny because that is like a Super Mario Land retelling of the Tetris story. I think we're near at the end of our show here. We're at 2 hours here. Anything you want to say before we close out here, David?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit about Carmack, because we're seeing a lot in the comments about like what was Carmack right about and what was Carmack wrong about. So um, one of the things that Carmack has been saying for a very long time is obviously that standalone was the future and mobile, and I think he was right about that. But as some commenters have pointed out, Carmack was actually very against 6-DoF controllers, and he believed that sitting down with a gamepad would actually be the dominant way to play VR games. Now, you could argue that maybe as we get thin and light headsets with high resolution, that maybe playing with a gamepad comes back more and more, right? That sitting in there, if it's comfortable on your head and has very high resolution, to make just being there more impactful than what has kind of been carrying VR so far, which is the interactivity of your hands, maybe turns out right. One of the things he was definitely right about, and he's been saying since the Gear VR days, was that all you need in VR is screens and people. This is what he used to say, that if you could just make 2D screens really compelling, as we often talk about, if you could sit with your friends on the other side of the planet and play, a split screen game or watch a movie together, that would be big enough to take VR mainstream on its own. It looks like in recent years, we've seen a resurgence of that idea, even though it died out in kind of the Quest 1 and Quest 2 era for a while, arguably because of the limitations of that hardware. But you can kind of, it's so interesting how it still, you could say, wasn't right to write off the idea of 6-DoF tracked controllers, right? Carmack was always about trying to get this to be the kind of cheaper, lighter, and better, right? He talked about how he was so against Quest Pro because he wanted to just see a super Quest 2. He wanted to just see the same thing as Quest 2, but cheaper and faster and better, right? You could imagine that if Carmack was made the czar of meta, Quest 3 would have been like a Quest 3S, but without Passthrough, and maybe focus on making it like lighter and things like that. But so it would have, he was actually very against mixed reality. He thought that this was like a useless added cost. He was very much so about getting like ripping out all of this extra feature stuff. And even in his mind, really, if he had been czar from the beginning, you wouldn't even have touch controllers. You'd have a gamepad there in the box, and you'd sit there on a spinny chair and play. Even 6-DoF, he was like, he wanted it there, but he didn't think it was essential. So I think you can see where his thought process comes from, and sometimes it goes too far, but sometimes it also kind of gets you in the right path.
Well, that's fascinating. Okay, and we put some of that in context to like the NBA conversation we had earlier, where we talked about the little diorama thing and also needing the big thing. I'm going to argue, or just put this out there, right? Let's throw this out to everyone and see what kind of wars they start. What if there was a time back when John Carmack personally added VR support to Minecraft for for VR, for the Gear VR, and that the way he built VR support was very close to what you just described. You play with a gamepad, the screen is flat, floating over there, and you press a button, and the world goes immersive. Okay, if Meta had said, we're shutting everything else down right now, we're not investing in a single other VR game that isn't in the format that John Carmack just debuted. Every single game on the Meta platform needs to be a flat game and then also have a button on it that expands out to be a virtual world. What games would we see in the Meta ecosystem? Would we have seen in the Meta ecosystem of the last decade that would have been funded for that specific type of format? And I mean, David, like, I'm pretty close to doing this today. Like, this is pretty close to the way that is actually won, and Meta didn't go that way.
Well, I mean, most people, if you look at the apps that people spend time in, right, it's Gorilla Tag, it's Beat Saber, it's VR Chat, it is 6DoF applications that use 6DoF hand tracking. And in the original Oculus Rift days, we talk about this as if it wasn't tried. The original Oculus Rift came with a gamepad and had all of these games that focused on this, right? You had Project Cars, you had Elite Dangerous, some big titles like this, as well as dedicated titles from the likes of Insomniac, like Edge of Nowhere, like Lucky's Tale, like Chronos. This was VR gaming for quite a while, and the original PlayStation VR as well. It by default, it supported a gamepad. Most games on PlayStation VR 1 were based on sitting with a gamepad and being immersed in a virtual world. Now, you're right to say that it didn't have that other functionality of being able to come back to a 2D screen at any time, but arguably the headsets weren't high enough resolution. It's super interesting to think, though, about now that we do or nearly have the resolution, right? The high-end headsets have it. The low-end headsets will get it in a matter of years, the resolution needed to make this compelling. Is this something that could come back? Is it easier to convince a studio to just add this kind of VR support? Could PlayStation VR 3 for PlayStation 6 be very, very based around this because it's got the resolution to make it compelling? Good question.
Triangle Strategy, right? How is that different? That was the game that released last year. How is that different from the vision that he outlined?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's different in that it's a 3D diorama, right? And you're using, as far as I know, still using 6DoF controls to control things. I do take your argument. This is a much wider discussion, right?
Yeah. So
yeah.
Sorry, David. Yeah. So we actually had some of that discussion on Gamescast on Tuesday with Don Hopper. We had we're getting a really good cadence with Don Hopper built into our streams. Go watch our dev streams as well as our game streams. Don and I were discussing trying to do Portal 2 co-op, him in VR, me on flat screen, and see if we could get that up and running from the studio into VR and flip back and forth them. And that's a wonderful, wonderful way to illustrate and continue this discussion that we're having in here into the future, because, you know, Valve already did this, so to speak, right? This already exists. This cool dream of playing across both systems together.
It's the path not taken, right? It is what Sony hinted that this was going to be its strategy for PSVR 2. They talked about this idea of hybrid games, right? And you could imagine that it could be a path still taken in a future iteration of Sony's VR strategy. And you could argue that like a lot of the VR modding space is around this, especially UEVR, where yes, you can of course go in and configure it to be 6DoF, but I find that the best way that UEVR really practically works is when you do accept it as just being put yourself in there in VR and still control it traditionally the way the game was meant to be controlled, even though you're not seeing it the way it was meant to be seen. And you could argue that, like, if you had one publisher that just came out and said, you know, we're going to put all of our PlayStation games with this sort of mode, right? You're still going to play with your DualShock, your whatever they call it now, the regular controller, DualSense, sorry, but you're going to be in the world. Again, I just think that gets more and more compelling the higher resolution you have, and I don't think PSVR 2 is quite there. But I'd be fascinated to see, like, Vision Pro, for example. Could we see some of the games are in Vision Pro take that approach? Right now, they're still very windowed, but I could imagine, you know, this being something that feature, maybe with the M5 chip, making it more graphically powerful. This is something that people want to try on Vision Pro in the future iteration that's rumored to be clear.
Yeah, I love the spread of comments here as we close out the show with some people not even knowing that there was a VR mod for Portal 2. Yes, there is. You can go get that out of the Steam store. And then other people like that's a vomit machine. And that's precisely why I want to play it in flat screen with Don, because that would make me sick. But Don has iron legs. And so we are going to play this game together exactly as we both dream, right? And we on the Gamescast we talked about Civ 7. Go watch that Gamescast for that discussion. We had this. I challenged Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know if you saw it, David, but I challenged Mark Zuckerberg to play Don Hopper in in Civ, and we're going to judge who wins based on two things: who drops out of headset first is like one game, right? Who lasts across the game, and obviously who wins first. We expect Mark Zuckerberg to wipe Don Hopper off the map. And such that maybe his social security card no longer applies in the future. Like that's how bad Mark Zuckerberg's going to beat him. But we also want to test this idea of like, how does it work to play a game like Civ for 6 hours in headset? Is there any transition software to out? Because that's part of the reason I'm going to want to play with Don. Don's going to go be tired after 2 hours in VR, looking around and throwing himself through all those portals. But I'm going to be walking around my house, right, with a controller in my hand, playing the game in a much more comfortable way. And we should have both.
Yeah, it does come back to what I'm saying, that all of these use cases of more anything where you're sitting down and just kind of experiencing something, whether it be on a 2D screen, a 3D flat screen, or being immersed but only without active controls and movement, it gets better and better when the headsets get lighter and higher resolution. And everything we've seen so far that's worked so well in VR has worked around the fact of really utilizing the fact that you're in VR with tracked controllers or hands. And what happens when the headsets are good enough that you don't need to lean on that? It's something we keep saying, but it does. It is something we expect to dramatically change in the next 3 to 5 years in this industry. We're not there yet. We're still with these 500-gram bricks on our face. We're still, 2K resolution in the headsets that people can actually afford. What happens when they're 250 grams and 4K per eye? Do you want to do all this stuff a lot more? I think the answer is absolutely yes, but we need to see.
So Siegfried, you're looking for Portal, and then you're getting Portal installed, and then you're looking into the Steam community for the Portal game for a mod that turned into VR. I think we might have to put instructions together for that one, right?
Yeah, I think we do. I thought we did have an article maybe that had instructions, but just to kind of build on this, I think
Oh,
we
the flat
talked
to
about
VR mod.
so much of PC VR is right now in the modding community, right? How so much of the traction there. I would love to see Valve build in build in VR modding to Steam. Imagine if you had a one-click button, the same way that they've made Linux gaming incredible with Proton, the same way that they've made kind of asset modding work very well with Workshop. What if there was a way that you could do a one-click community-supported mod on Steam to run some of these games in VR? Would that need publisher support? Maybe. But if Valve did it even with their own games, you could imagine how well this could work, right? I mean, you already kind of do have that in a sense with Half-Life 2 VR and things like that being distributed through Steam. But what if this was so baked into the Steam interface that you could, with a couple of clicks, be in VR? I do think there's massive opportunity here to take this enormous effort that modders are putting in and streamline it for PC VR users.
Yeah, and I like to imagine that's the things behind the behind the scenes that everyone out here is frustrated. They want all those old AAA games in VR. Well, you got to get a publisher agreement. You got to work out all the systems so that it's actually easy to get that install. And there's a company out there that's leading that charge. It's Flat to VR Studios. We are watching them. We're reporting on them constantly, and they're doing very, very interesting things. We are in contact with Team Beef and all their crazy mods that they roll out. And Farmer saying, yeah, the mod community is what makes PC VR so incredible. And I'm going to argue on, that's the missing context of Carmack's comment, is that, PC VR is always going to be there because it is open. That's part of the thing that you can't undo. There will still be a cave somewhere with laser base stations running Half-Life Alyx and a couple flat to VR mods, right? 30, 50, 100 years from now, it's like You're going to be people screwdrivering in those base stations and repairing the rotors on them for a long time in order to keep those systems running. I think. You don't think there will be one or two in the world 50 years from now, David?
Sure, there'll be one or two, but the vast majority of them will be using, like, if you try to imagine what headsets are going to look like 40 years from now, I think they're not going to be using the laser base stations. They're going to be beyond our wildest imaginations, right? You're going to be talking about like holographic optics with like event sensors and just things we can't even imagine.
My point, yeah, if the world doesn't fall apart first, I think that's what some of our conversations in VR tend to go to. I don't know how many conversations I've had where I give a person a VR demo and then I spend an hour basically helping them through the dystopias that their minds are now open to. All right. I think that's it for us at UploadVR this week. Thank you, David Heaney, for this time and for the excellent reporting this week. Thank you, Don Hopper out there, and to Henry Stockdale for this ongoing reporting that we're all doing. Thank you to our patrons and our members for supporting our work. Please consider doing that to expand our coverage area. As I said, we've got 5 or 6 military articles on our website, and we've given you every indication that it is a huge, huge coverage area of enormous interest on a global scale. So you can help us focus on that in the future by becoming a member or patron. We'll see you later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you in the future.